Good afternoon and welcome to Hitwise Christmas Unwrapped webinar. Great to have you all attending today. We are going to cover a few key areas here, so look at some of the key retail stats and findings from Q4. We'll look at some of the trends that we're seeing year on year, and we'll also start to bring forward some of the top players, top risers, and who saw success during the festive season. The webinar will be around 35 to 40 minutes, and then we'll have around 15 to 20 minutes of Q&A for opportunity for you to put through any questions via chat. And if we don't get to that question, we will answer that through Account Manager and get back to you with that. So just a little bit about Hitwise. Hopefully you know a good bit about us already. Just a summary of some of the key areas that are important to us. So we provide that complete view really across online measurement and then audience understanding and targeting. From a sample perspective, we really focus on ensuring we have the deepest sample in the markets that we operate, right across both desktop and mobile devices. And then from a depth perspective, we really focus around the keyword depth within our data, with a huge number of keywords that we can measure to really understand, specifically at this time of year, the top products that are really driving demand during the peak season. And then more recently, we've also done an integration with Kantar Media's TGI to bring in a whole range of lifestyle and attitudinal variables that allow us to provide even deeper and richer profiles of who the customers are that are navigating the internet. From a data frequency perspective, key focus for us really right across those trends, from seasonal trends through to hourly insights, and you'll see some of those being brought forward in the slides today. So I'm Giles Longhurst, General Manager of the Hitwise business in the UK, and joining me today is Lisa.
Hi, I'm Lisa. I'm the Manager of Innovation and Insights, and I'm also the analyst behind this webinar. So for today's agenda, we wanted to cover the key headlines that we saw from last year's peak season. These include how November and December returned to growth for retail, and it brought that much needed boost, particularly coming from the online channel. But how not all retail verticals saw the same success. So we're going to dip into some of those more struggling segments to the higher performing segments. Thirdly, how audience profiles, their interests and channels of engagement shifted over the quarter, as Giles had mentioned, using some of our Kantar Media TGI variables to inform that. Fourthly, Amazon once again dominated with over 25% of retail traffic. We're going to dip into a little bit of what drove their dominance and what drove their success at the end of 2017. And finally, take a look at some of those top risers, namely Matches Fashion and also Pretty Little Thing, what drove their success year on year as well.
So let's look at the first area. So what we saw in November and December was a much needed boost to retail after a tough October trading period. So building on that, October saw a retail slump of around about 1% year on year in terms of like-for-like total sales, according to the BRC. On the other hand, on the flip side, we saw significant growth in terms of online retail visits, which grew by around 6% in the month. But this is really showing, I suppose, a trend towards the research and advance and certainly waiting for some of the sales promotions to come forward. The October slump seemed to have spurred a November and December growth in performance, and we saw a return to growth of 0.6% in like-for-like across both November and December, with online sales very much driving this, with 6.5% in November and 7.6% in December. So really making up for that poor start to the beginning of that peak trading period. When it comes to looking at the trend itself, we thought it was useful to look across the last 3 years and view this across the pre-Black Friday period, the Cyber Week, and then going into the last minute Christmas and Christmas week. We do see very similar trends across the 3 years, with some sort of differences. And from a peak performance perspective, what we see within Cyber Week is a 6% year-on-year increase to just over the 1.2 billion visits. And then when it comes to the Christmas week, just over the 1 billion mark at a 5% year-on-year increase. The trend that I would point out is really between the 28th of October and the 11th of November, where we do see a slight change in the direction and the movement of those trend lines. And what we're seeing and what we're feeling we're seeing here is really those promotions where they're starting earlier and starting to drive performance and growth in visits as we go from the beginning of December, whereas in previous years it's really been in the week or the 2 weeks leading up to Cyber Week. So a slight shift that we're starting to see occur and probably will be even more pronounced next year. Looking at conversions, we can really start to drill into what's sort of driving the performance of conversion across this period. So breaking this down into the early bird, the Cyber Week, and leading up to Christmas periods, we see a change in activity. So during the early bird period, we see visits climbing and also search share rising, but we also see conversions declining slightly from the period in September, around about the sort of 5% mark as an average. As we go up into Cyber Week, we really see a spike in terms of the number of visits, and we see search share peak at around 31%. And from a conversions perspective, we actually see a reduction, so coming down just below the 5% period level during this period. When it comes to Christmas, we see visits decline, and not surprisingly, we start to see conversion rates increase. So some useful benchmarks to start using within your businesses to understand how you're performing. And at peak conversion, we're seeing a conversion rate around the 6.3% mark. A lot of this we're seeing driven by some of the really high conversion rates that we're seeing out of Amazon as well. So some good sort of stats to look at and compare to your own numbers. And then looking at it from an offline to online perspective and trying to see where the big shifts take place, again, across these key trading periods. So in October, we start to see a divergence between both the in-store and online, so strong growth coming through from online sales and a reduction in terms of the amount of in-store retail visits. As we go through the November period, we see them coming together slightly, with only really a shift of -5 and +6 during that Cyber Week period, and then moving through into Christmas and the last minute shopping period. Probably the most pronounced trend that we see within this is that week of the 16th of December, where we see quite a significant year-on-year change in terms of in-store, which seems to be then reflecting in the online visits the following week or the following 2 weeks, where we're seeing quite substantial increases. So it does seem like there's a sort of lag between both the in-store and the online of around 1 to 2 weeks, which is driving those trends through that period.
And finally, when it comes to our headlines, we also wanted to show you the top 10 retailers. So this is over the period of November and December 2017 compared to the previous year. So when it comes to the top 10 retailers, more or less it's fairly stable with 2 call-outs. So with Amazon, once again, they dominated with 26% of retail traffic. This was fairly static across the 2 years. Another notable point is that ASOS and Boots at 2% growth and 11% growth respectively, they entered our top 10 rankings at the end of 2017. Which moves us on to our second headline, where we saw that not all retail verticals performed the same or saw the same success towards the end of last year. So let's zoom into Black Friday, where we are pinpointing here hour by hour performance in the retail industry. So what we see is that really in those early morning hours, people are accessing different retail specialists at different points in time. There's a higher share from 12 a.m. to 6 a.m. of computers, video games, appliances, and electronics. This then shifts to a higher share of ticketing, into around about the lunchtime hours and early afternoon. There's a shift to groceries and alcohol, as well as rewards and directories. And finally, towards the end of the day, there's a higher spike in apparel, sports, toys, and health and beauty. So what this chart shows is just a snapshot of one day, but how did these verticals perform over the quarter, and particularly over those 2 peak weeks that Giles had mentioned? So firstly, looking at Black Friday week, so the week ending the 25th of November 2017. Another trend that Giles had mentioned is that we saw a number of verticals and more players participating in Black Friday sales. So this is demonstrated here with a number of verticals such as apparel, house and garden, sport, health and beauty, and groceries, seeing double-digit growth when it comes to visit share online. When we compare that to the retail industry average, which grew at 5.3% year on year, an interesting point to note is that the two more traditional verticals for Black Friday, such as electronics and toys, actually grew at a slower rate than the industry average itself. So comparing this to the second peak week, which occurred over Christmas, so this is the week ending the 30th of December. Only 3 of these verticals saw that same double-digit growth online, and these were house and garden, health and beauty, and groceries, who were able to continue that year-on-year rise. Another point to note as well, toys only grew at 3% year-on-year, which was also below the industry average of 4.5%.
So digging deeper into toys and hobbies, we did see that these toy specialists didn't really see the same rise that they'd had in previous years. And so we thought we'd look at the actual top products within this group. What we saw for 2017 was that fingerlings didn't really reach that same status that we saw for Hatchimals, which really blew things away last year with the growth that it saw. And what we saw for the 12 weeks to the end of the year, Hatchimals had around double the search share to retail sites compared to fingerlings. And from an audience perspective, the total number of audiences, people looking at those products, it's about 44% smaller for fingerlings compared to the Hatchimals audience. So quite a big difference between what was being driven through from that perspective. Another real favourite, Lego, also saw quite a shift this year, a real performer over really the last 5 years, and something that's still strong in the top 10, but actually saw a search share that was actually 31% down year on year. So quite a shift there for that product. So it'll be interesting to see what happens next year. From the other perspective, the other brands and products that we saw coming through quite strongly was really the rise in consoles, specifically the Nintendo Switch, which really seemed to make quite a splash this year, alongside some of the tablets and new mobile devices that were coming through during this period, which possibly shows a bit of a shift in terms of both the types of products that are being bought, but also the audiences and the range of children groups that are buying, moving more towards electronics products.
So as Giles had mentioned, we may be seeing a shift in toy preferences, particularly in that middle-aged children's group, which brings us on to our next point around audiences. So another key trend that we saw over Q4 was the shift in the audience profile, their searches, and the channels of engagement as we track this week by week from October to December. So before we showcase this data, just a point to note that Q4, it's the peak season for a reason. As we see that the majority of the online population are engaging in one form or another with retail sites over this quarter. But retailers, they can't really take a blanket approach to this, as what we're going to show is that the profile of the consumer shifts as we progress week on week. So with this chart, we're showcasing the data with our partner, Kantar Media TGI. So what we've done is we've modeled the consumer electronic archetypes against Hitwise's online retail traffic data. So at the start of October, we see a higher share of 2 main archetypes. These were the accustomed acquirers, so people who are more driven by brand, happy to spend more on quality, less driven by price. We also see the rise of another archetype, the review researchers. These people perform thorough research before making a product purchase. As we edge closer to Black Friday, we see another rise in another group, the spontaneous spenders. So these people, they're more characterized as more risk takers, and they're largely driven by promotions and by ads. Hitting into that last minute Christmas period, again, we see the rise of the accustomed acquirers. So people less driven by price, potentially also less organized, heading into Christmas. And finally, for the Boxing Day shopper, comes the rise of the next archetype, the image idolizers. So shoppers who are driven by brand image, and brand design as well.
But what are these audience profiles interested in? And what we use here is really looking at search as a key way to understand the intent of the consumer and how these different terms spike at different times. What we see for October, as we're coming through that Halloween period, is still quite a strong demand for Halloween costumes, as well as searches for fashion and furniture. So a real sort of shift in terms of what we're seeing at the beginning, which we'll see changing as we go through November and December. When it comes to Black Friday, typically we see spikes in electronics brands and gadgets, and this was still prevalent this year. However, we're also seeing higher participation in fashion and beauty brands that are coming through, alongside some of the gadget brands that we mentioned previously that are starting to spike during this period. When it comes to last-minute shoppers, we typically see a spike in gifts, and we see that same spike, but we're also seeing an increase in some of the gift carding and e-gift kind of products, alongside groceries, which we'd expect as people start to make those final purchases for Christmas Day. When it comes to Boxing Day, we see a stronger focus on brands with searches for specific department stores where they're looking for specific deals, and also fashion brands. So really starting to show how these audience profiles build out from a number of different angles. When it comes to channel preferences across these 4 audience groups, what we see is search is very much prevalent across the whole period, as you'd expect. What we see towards the beginning with the early bird shoppers is very much this focus towards social media. So there's a lot of sharing, a lot of understanding, and building up a view towards the brands and the products that they're likely to be interested in purchasing as they move towards the November and December key conversion period. When it comes to Black Friday, we see a rise towards email, as well as some of the rewards and voucher sites. People are looking for deals that are going to be purchased during that period of Cyber Week. We also see quite an increase in the amount of visits to IT media and publishers. So this is people carrying out review of different products and understanding and making comparisons between them to make the right choice before they spend their hard-earned cash. When it comes to Boxing Day, we then see a shift towards some different channels here, with news and media publishers coming through, as well as online television shows that they're viewing online. And what I think we're seeing here is really a shift in both the way that consumers are viewing during this post-Christmas period, and also the way that marketers are trying to target them across different channels that they're now spending their time online.
So as Giles had mentioned, there's a shift in channel preferences over the period from October to December. We're also seeing a shift within the day, hour by hour, particularly on those peak days. So in this chart, we're showing the peak in key channels hour by hour on Black Friday. So search, as Giles had mentioned, by far trumps all other channels, where clicks from search start to rise from 9 a.m. But there are some interesting trends when we zoom in to those smaller channels in the chart below. So if we were to exclude search, other channels such as rewards, such as email, and news publishers, they begin to rise and peak around that 6 a.m. and 9 a.m. mark, giving opportunity to retailers and to brands on how to target in over this peak day. comparing this to Cyber Monday, so another peak day as well, channel preferences and also channel behavior also differs. So with search, there's a delayed rise to around about 11 a.m. on Cyber Monday. Zooming deeper into the smaller channels as well, email has a stronger prominence on Cyber Monday, where clicks from email to retail sites spike around that 9 a.m. mark. As well, social media rises to prominence in those late evening hours.
So what does this mean for retailers? Well, really this is the opportunity to understand when consumers are accessing the different channels, at which points in time over the quarter, but also hour by hour over these peak days of trading. It's kind of giving you the information about when to send emails, understanding when competitors are sending emails, but also when to post social media and when you're likely to get the highest traction, both in terms of traffic, but also in terms of conversion as well across these periods.
So once again, one such retailer that did this very successfully over the last quarter was Amazon. And we're going to delve into a little bit more, particularly in their use of email and how they drove, how that drove traffic. So Amazon in Q4 received over 25% of retail traffic. And we're also going to showcase how the sales of their own products also drove this growth as well. So zooming a little bit deeper into Amazon's strategy over Cyber Week, what this chart shows you is hour by hour on Black Friday. Really no other retailer matches the level of traffic that they receive. So a little bit about their Cyber Week strategy. Amazon launched their sales on Friday the 17th of November. So that was 3 days before the commencement of Cyber Week. On this Friday, they saw just over 40 million visits to their site as well, which was about a 12% increase from the previous day. Amazon as well, they saw a lot of success on Cyber Monday, and for the first time they received more visits on Cyber Monday at 51.2 million than Black Friday, which still received around about 50.3 million visits to their site. So in other words, whilst retailers more or less had more of a focus on Black Friday, Amazon still went fairly aggressive right through to Cyber Monday, seeing that success right through that week. But not to discount Black Friday, Amazon saw higher conversions on Black Friday at 7.9%. In other words, almost 1 in every 12 consumers who went onto Amazon's site went on to convert, compared to Cyber Monday, which saw a conversion rate of 7.1%. But something to note about Cyber Monday, their conversions on Cyber Monday actually grew by 15% year on year, so still very highly successful. So zooming a little bit deeper into Cyber Monday, as we mentioned, their visits grew to 51 million, which was a rise of 8% compared to the previous year. Email played a large role to that. So their reliance on email grew by 25% on Cyber Monday as well. So in this chart, we can actually map out exactly which hour saw these peaks from email to Amazon's site. So over the course of the day, there were several peaks around about 2 a.m., 6 a.m., 9 a.m. and also 1 p.m., which corresponded to dynamic emails that Amazon sent through, emphasizing the big discounts that they were sending, and also emphasizing consumers to hurry before Cyber Monday finishes.
And then in terms of the products that were driving this, there's always a large dominance behind these trends in terms of the top products that are being promoted. What we see here is really looking at the singular product purchases for both Amazon products, branded products, as well as other products that they're showcasing. First up, we have the Fire TV Stick with Alexa voice remote, was the #1 singular purchase product on Amazon during this November to December period. And we're seeing a really strong conversion rate, just around the peak level that we saw across the whole industry, which 6.3%. Here we're seeing a 6% conversion rate for this product. The next one that's interesting is really around the Amazon Echo Dot, all second generation products, but with the different colors that we're seeing from the black, the charcoal and the white. And what we're seeing is very much the black is the one with the highest volume, with nearly 250,000 singular purchases, but with a much lower conversion rate to the white, which is showing that there may well be a sort of a decision that's been made before purchase, which is driving that conversion rate on the white Amazon Dot up to 6%. So some quite interesting trends just within their own products there, and the way that they're branded and manufactured. When it comes to other products, we see quite an interesting trend here, which we hope is something that could be interesting for other retailers to grasp hold of for 2018. These are really for their gift cards, and you'd expect to see a higher conversion rate, and we certainly do. We're seeing conversion rates well over the 20% range, and even up to 43% conversion rate for people looking at these e-gift cards. What's also interesting to note here is the different branding, the different designs that are actually really providing a kind of additional ranges and really satisfying different age groups and different gifting ideas and different audiences, which we talked about in the previous slides, which becomes a real opportunity for developing a deeper gifting strategy, which may also start to tell us a little bit more around why we saw a drop-off in some of the toys that were purchased last year, as we're seeing more gift cards being used as a way as allowing people to take a little bit more control of what the purchases are for their children during this period.
This moves us on to our final headline. So whilst Amazon took over a quarter of retail share, a number of online retailers and brands still saw success and still saw substantial year-on-year growth in the November and December period. So coming from a smaller base, a number of new and growing players in the luxury and beauty space, fast fashion, as well as overseas retailers saw that double-digit and even triple-digit year-on-year growth. We're going to zoom into some of these key players. So Matches Fashion, Pretty Little Thing, PLT, and Tmall, which is owned by the Chinese group Alibaba. So whilst these three players, they come from fairly different verticals, one point that is common across all three is that digital innovation and meeting customer expectations was at the heart of their success across the three. So firstly, when it came to Matches Fashion, when we're looking at that October to December period, visits to their site grew by 80% year on year. We see two spikes when we look at the weekly trend. So Matches saw a 106% rise in visits over Black Friday week, which is quite interesting, seeing that luxury doesn't normally play in that Black Friday sales period, but a trend to look out for as it's growing each year. Luxury tends to more align to the Boxing Day sale, but Matches Fashion still saw a rise of 23% in traffic in that week ending the 30th of December. So when it comes to luxury, Matches Fashion, they're really one of the forerunners in that space. They have a deep understanding of who their customer is and how to meet their expectations online. For us, Matches Fashion, they really understand how to deliver on customer loyalty and innovated in areas that matters the most to their customer base, namely experience, delivery, and also having an extensive product offering. So one such innovation that we found was quite interesting and very leading for their industry was launching a 90-minute delivery service in selected locations in London. So this launched towards the end of 2016, start of 2017. They also strengthened their premium delivery services to allow that luxury consumer to choose the exact date and the exact hour of when their products are delivered to their doorstep. This moves us on to our second top riser, PLT, who quite interestingly, they sit on the opposite end of the fashion spectrum, one of the leaders in the fast fashion space. Even though they have a very different consumer base, PLT, we believe, have a very clear understanding of who their audience is and a very clear understanding of how to target them, essentially by being very young, very fast, and also very social. So what we saw over 2017 was a lot of effort being put into strengthening their social media strategy, as well as their celebrity and reality star collaborations. You might have seen on the subway or different adverts here and there. Towards the end of the last year, PLT collaborated with one of the Kardashians, Kourtney Kardashian, I believe, with releasing a Christmas party season line as well. So in this chart here, we wanted to zoom in on what PLT did quite differently on Black Friday. So they also had a very successful Black Friday. Total visits to their site grew by 87% year on year. The reliance on social media, so clicks from social media to their site, also grew by 57% year on year as well. So if we were to zoom in hour by hour, we can see exactly when PLT saw a spike from social. So they use different mediums such as Facebook, such as YouTube to drive that traffic, particularly in those evening hours from 7 to 11 p.m. They use social media to promote those extensive discounts and also to promote flash competitions as well. Another key point that we wanted to note, so to create that urgency on Black Friday and also on Cyber Monday, PLT, they featured a countdown on their site, which had the percentage of discounts that a consumer could receive drop as the hours passed, hour by hour, which is quite interesting. And finally, moving on to our third top riser, Tmall. So Tmall's owned by Chinese giant Alibaba Group. So whilst their dominance is quite well established in Asia and also in China, particularly in China, Tmall is starting to make a splash in international markets like the UK. Their main sales event, which is Singles Day, this falls on the 11th of November. So visits from the UK to Tmall's site grew by 206% year on year, which was to roughly about 500,000 visits to Tmall's site. So when it comes to 500,000, this number is fairly small when you're to compare these numbers to Amazon, for instance, in the UK. But when we look at the Singles Day performance on a global scale, Alibaba makes about $25 billion in sales globally. And this number just continues to increase. So this was an increase of 39% year on year. So if we were to compare this to Amazon, Amazon made about $3 billion USD in the US on Black Friday. So substantially larger and still growing. So it's just one of the trends that we wanted to point out. Tmall and Alibaba Group, they're going to have a growing influence in the retail season, particularly towards the end of the year. With their peak sales day in the 11th of November, we might see a growing shift, most likely see a growing shift to that earlier period in November as well. So in summary, in this webinar, we looked at the top stats and top findings from 2017's retail peak season. We had some positives. We also had some negative stats as well. So in summary, the online channel is definitely driving retail performance. After a slump in October, November and December returned back to growth at 0.6% year on year when it comes to like-for-like sales. Secondly, but not all verticals are performing at the same rate. We noted that there's slowing growth, particularly among electronics and toy specialists. in comparison to other verticals like health and beauty and like groceries, which is still seeing that very much strong double-digit online growth. Audiences, something that Giles had covered, audience profiles, what they're searching for, the channels that they prefer, is also shifting over the quarter. So matching this with Kantar Media TGI variables, we see a shift from review researchers and accustomed acquirers at the start of October through to more image idolizers towards the end of December. Our fourth point, Amazon is still finding opportunities to grow, as we saw last year with Cyber Monday, and continue to dominate with 26% of retail traffic. And finally, when it comes to top risers, like the stories that we mentioned for Matches Fashion, PLT, and Tmall, these three retailers, although they come from very different retail verticals, they show that the importance of digital, social media, and meeting your customer expectations online is really what drives success year on year.
Great. So what are the challenges and opportunities for 2018? So we really see a continuing story around online migration. We see some pretty exciting success stories that we're coming through in terms of how to grow, audience size and acquire new customers overall. But overall, we are seeing that continued shift. We're also seeing a trend which really builds on last year, which is these extended promotional periods. They're starting earlier, they're lasting for longer. And really the question for retailers is, what is October going to look like going forward? Is this going to be a slump month going forward and we're always going to have to accept that? Or is there an opportunity for how retailers can really use October to start driving loyalty and improving their targeting going through into the peak trading period of November and December? The extended promotions are starting to lead to a level of consumer skepticism around whether the actual size and the percentage discounts that they're seeing on products is really kind of the levels that they were expecting from a few years ago. And I think, again, where retailers have got to answer this question is how do you drive and build trust while there's this sort of perceived view from the customer base around how these discounts are going to land. For us, this really comes down to how to understand the customers that you're talking to. We looked across those periods of the evolving customer segments, really from October through to the post-Christmas period. And so building to an understanding of exactly what is going to matter from a sort of attitudinal lifestyle perspective, the channels that they care about, and the timing of when to impact those channels and deploy those campaigns, but also just thinking about the way that the products that you're positioning and the designs and the sort of focal point of those, how to change that during that period to make sure that you're meeting and exceeding the expectations of the customers during that period. And lastly, from a perspective of quite an important area for 2018 is really how we see the change with GDPR coming through in May this year, and how that will affect the way that both we understand our customers, but also how we can target them. There are going to be quite a number of changes, and everyone's working through this at this point. But I think it will be something that will look slightly different when we come to reviewing peak season of 2018. So one for us to watch and work on to ensure that we can still continue to provide the same levels of audience targeting capabilities right across the advertising ecosystem, which we're all going to be very much working through together.
Great. So that brings us to the end of our webinar presentation portion. So we're just going to take some questions now. So they're just coming through right now. So for our first question, quite interesting about Amazon. So are your Amazon searches app or browser?
Yeah, I'll take that. So yeah, so the Amazon searches that we're looking at a combination of things here. So on the searches, we'll be looking at product searches within any of the key search engines, but we are also, as you say, looking at native searches within Amazon. So we can see within websites and look at those native searches based on a browser. We can also see down to the transactional level, again, on a browser. Yes, those are browser-based stats.
Moving on to our second question, which is also linked. So it's quite interesting. We're getting a lot of questions around our Amazon analytics and how we can look into Amazon stats. So for our first question, how do you get conversions?
You can take that?
So what we showcased in some of our slides was our conversion rate. So how we collect that data is basically looking at the subdomain, so looking deeper than the top URL and really segmenting and trying to capture that point where people are making that purchase. So I think this came from one of the slides that Giles had presented at the start of the webinar, where we looked at the average conversion rate. So this was an aggregation of around about 30 top retailers and looking at their online purchase rates, which we aggregated week by week.
Yeah, so in essence, looking at the total traffic to the site and then the number of people that are reaching a checkout or a purchase confirmation page. Got a few more coming through.
So this is also interesting. How accurately could you have captured data and shopping behavior, especially for Amazon and ASOS? How accurate?
Yeah. I mean, I think I'm not sure whether that is what specifically that relates to, but I think in terms of whether that's kind of down to the granularity that we're tracking within the site, possibly that's the question now. I'm not sure, but I think the way that we're able to break down a website and look at the the pages within that site as well as the purchases really comes through from the same methodology. So everything that's being picked up within the URL that someone is browsing within, we will see that see that data and be able to define that based on a site level or a section within a site or or a purchase within a site.
This is quite interesting. Another question which came from our top risers section. So is there anything more that we can show on the interest of Singles Day in the UK? So this is quite interesting. At Hitwise, we've been looking at the trends of Singles Day year on year. So really it's growing exponentially, but still from a very much a small basis. And last year we saw levels of traffic hitting in that 500,000 mark. So it's something that we're expecting to see grow even further. Another thing that we're also noticing, so Tmall is still very much targeted in the Chinese language. So we're going to see a rise in different affiliates or different agents who are helping UK consumers purchase on the giant Alibaba and on Tmall to facilitate that communication between the two. So it's something to definitely look out for. The base is small, but it's just growing at such a huge rate that it's something that retailers definitely need to look out for this year.
Just to say, we're seeing a few questions just around specific stats, and we will of course be sharing the presentation with you as well. So you'll have all of the stats that are within this presentation that you can use after the event.
So you mentioned, sorry, I can't really read this writing. You mentioned October saw an underperformance across the board. How down was this year on year? So this is quite interesting. So this came from our first chapter. So we referenced data from one of our association partners, the BRC. So there was a decline of I believe 1% in terms of like-for-like sales year on year. Obviously, as we noted in the second chapter, this wasn't consistent across the different retail verticals. Something that we see, which is very much aligned to BRC data, is that when it comes to food, so groceries, alcohol, this is still growing. That's very much driving growth. And this is to the other end of the spectrum. When you see specialists in electronics and toys, that was also more or less underperforming in that October period as well.
Another question here, just in terms of if we're seeing any signs of consumers deferring sales to Cyber Week or purchases to Cyber Week, Cyber Monday. Yeah, I think we are starting to see that shift. I think that's been going on for a number of years, with Black Friday always being the sort of key event, which has started shifting and prolonging and extending further towards the Monday. I think we also see that in the conversion rates, where the conversion rates kind of grow almost post the peak traffic period. So I think we're starting to see that, but really it's probably better to think about it as a week of activity rather than necessarily just the 2 days. It seems that the two really work in tandem in many ways right now.
Yeah, and so last year we also published quite a bit on Cyber Week, and when we compared retail traffic year on year, we saw that on Black Friday, visits to retail sites actually only grew by 1% on Black Friday. But then when we looked at Cyber Monday, so this is taking into account the entire industry, Cyber Monday grew by 7%. So it's really that opportunity for retailers to look beyond Black Friday. Another trend as well that we saw was, and something that Giles had also mentioned, was we're seeing faster growth in that week before Cyber Monday. So there's definitely a shift in behavior. People are not just waiting for that one day, and retailers are definitely starting their promotions earlier, which is something that was a caution note that we mentioned at the end of the webinar too.
One point rather than more of a question, I think it's quite an interesting one that's come through, is just that 2017 was the first year since 2012 where Black Friday fell before the 25th, which is when most people are getting paid as well. So that's quite an interesting, driver of those trends as well, and a year-on-year shift that we're seeing. So that might be an interesting one we can look into in a little bit more detail.
And it will be more pronounced this year too. Yeah, with the dates falling even earlier than the 24th. Anything else? I think that's there's one more question, or final question, which I'll let Giles answer. So do you use cookies to get your online data?
No, we don't. No, we use so basically what we're tracking from a device level, in essence. So whether it be a desktop or a smartphone or a tablet, we're picking up all of the browser-based activity within that device, and then we're taking that data, gives us the full view across the activity of that device, and all of the events that took place, whether that be a website visit or a search that we're picking up through the URL. We're then taking that data, we filter that, we weight that, and then we kind of scale that up into the metrics that you see within the product here. So yeah, it's kind of coming from a device level and the browser within that.
Great. So I think that wraps up all of our questions. Please feel free to get in contact with your account manager or your consultant to send more questions. We will be circulating this deck and also the recording in a couple of days' time. So yes, please feel free to send your questions, and thank you for attending our webinar.